Stuff. Hey, folks, welcome with us this morning. Have we disappeared again?
No,
We're there?
we're good.
Okay. Well, just a minute ago, we were trying to go live, and everything was here but the two of us.
Yeah, we disappeared.
We disappeared. But hopefully y'all can see us. We are not invisible. And it's Barry and Mac this morning because Kirkwood is on the road again somewhere. We don't know where he is. He's just been gone for yet another week. Kirkwood, it would be nice for you to come home. So there you go. We figured you're up north somewhere, but that's a lot of territory. So let's look at the passage. Chapter 33 of Exodus is where we are. We've been in Exodus since this past September, and we'll make it to September with still in Exodus. I don't much imagine we'll get out of it before September. So we're in the 33rd chapter, beginning verse 1 through about verse 15, really, is where I think I stopped yesterday.
Yeah, and yesterday was a was a very special day in the life of our church. I mean, before we get to the sermon, we celebrated your 5-year anniversary.
Oh, yeah.
As pastor, and the search committee was up there and had some wonderful things to say.
They did. They were up there lying, but
You know, as you think, Pastor, I mean, it has been 5 years. What are some, it's gone fast, but what are some highlights? What are some things that stand out to you? You think, man, what have we seen God do maybe in the past 5 years that just stand out to you?
well, the first thing that I think, as I go back and remember is I had some personal goals and determinations when I came in here about staff. And after about 9 months, I saw the staff really begin to come out. I just had determined I wanted to wait. I wanted to build trust with the staff. I wanted them to reach a comfort level with me, to know who I was, and to give them the freedom to do their ministries. So after about 9 months, I began to see really a difference in the staff. They were really beginning to come out. I think they were comfortable at that point with me. And that's big. The church wouldn't normally think about that or see it. You wouldn't see what goes on, day to day here in these offices. But that was huge. That was answer to prayer. It was, I think, the goodness of God. So that was one. The second thing I'd have to say is I've never worked with elders before. And I've never really thought about elders before because I see two offices in the New Testament: deacon, pastor, elder. I see pastor, elder as really one office. But this church had elders, so they saw it as three: pastor, elder, deacon. And to work with the elders has been a real joy. I've never been a single tense moment, bad decision or anything, which to me is miraculous. I've learned something out of it. I hope they've learned something out of it as well. So I would say that, secondly. And then I'd have to go to watching the people who have come to know Christ, which is happening more and more. Watching the people who have been drawn to this church, the giftedness that they have, how they have begun to put their gifts into use here, how this church just seemingly began to express its, I'm going to just say its sweet, kind nature to people and making them feel welcome. The missions, of course, this church had deep commitment to missions before we got here. And all that has done is just blossom even more, grow even more, locally, in the state, in the nation, and then around the world. We commissioned yet another group to go out. They're going to San Diego, where we have already invested pretty heavily in that church plant out there. And so they're going out there to work with that church plant. Just those kind of things.
Yeah. It's been a great 5 years. I think of
You've been here 5 years. You
Just
in fact,
about,
you
yeah.
came a week before I did, or 2 weeks before I did.
About the same time, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think of Old Town, you know, what a blessing
Yeah,
that's been.
thought about that, yeah.
The debt retirement,
Mm-hmm.
what a blessing. And I think of staff too. I think of all the new staff God has brought us.
Right.
Talented, gifted, and existing staff as well. I think of ministry offerings like Awana and Reengage and things that the Lord has brought here that are ministering to families.
Right, right.
And I do think of those who were saved. We had the lady saved yesterday in the first service. So remember we did the wedding a few years ago, a couple that
Yeah.
had decided really to get right with the Lord. And
Right.
so we did a wedding on a Sunday morning in the middle of a worship service.
Yeah.
So that was
Yeah.
that was pretty special.
And Iglesia
Yes.
has really come to life too, with Andreas, pastor there, ordaining some of that congregation and really not making it their congregation, our congregation,
Yeah.
but it's all the congregation at Valleydale and their deacons being a part of our deacon body.
Yeah.
So their deacons, you know, we're part of what's going on with them and they're part of what's going on with us. That's good. Pastor Joe and his church, that was a real rich time. We've helped them. They're up, they're thriving, they're doing great ministry over there. So there's been a lot of things
Yeah.
to give thanks for.
Amen.
The marriages that have been restored, the homes that have been, brought back together. So it's God's blessed in a ton of ways, and 5 years has gone so fast.
Yeah, it's been quick.
It
But
really
we're
has.
thankful. You know, the psalmist talks about recount what the Lord has done. So we're just thankful for what God's done. And as we think about the sermon yesterday, there's a couple of things. I thought, one, when you mentioned the Lord said, go up to a land flowing with milk and honey. And I remember, and you talked about how, that really represents the total resources for life.
Right.
And I remember when you took us several years ago, or a number of years ago, when you took us from Egypt to Israel, I remember being at the border, and it literally, that passage took on a new meaning, because Egypt is dirty and dusty and barren, and then you come into Israel, and parts of it are fertile and hilly and different terrain. And it's true.
It is. One of the amazing things to me, I've watched literally over 40, almost 43 years now of going to Israel, is I go back through places that used to be nothing but desert, and they've got entire palm date forests. Now, I mean forests of palm date trees. And the Israelis have figured out a drip system of water. Now you see these massive trees and they just drip water in it. I mean, just literally there's like a hose that they wrap around each of these trees and they just drip water on it. They got an entire forest there now.
Fascinating.
And almost every other year, as I go back, now we've been there this year, we're going back this coming year because I've had so many request of people to go. Almost every other year that I go back, they have planted even more, so that down by the Dead Sea, they're slowly turning that back into forest. The land of Israel was so different in Jesus' day than it is in our day. Because one of the reasons why was that they had cut so many trees down, basically just deforested the nation almost. They've done that in Haiti. Haiti is one of the most sad places you'll ever look because they've cut down basically every tree that's down there. We went on one mission trip there. That's all we did was we planted trees. We took water systems in as well, did some medical stuff. But we went out, and one of the main things we did was plant trees because people are just begging for trees, in their yard.
Yeah.
Well, they've done that now with Israel. They are beginning to replant all of these, or they have been doing it. And it's amazing the difference in the land. They will line up on either side of it, from Egypt to Jordan. They will line up with dump trucks coming into, do you remember seeing these? The dump trucks coming into Israel and then turning around and going out where they've loaded up with oranges, fruit, grapefruit, oranges. just dump trucks full of them, going back into Jordan, going back into Egypt, because it literally, the Old Testament says it will bloom as a rose. The desert will bloom, and it's doing it.
Yeah, and so I was thinking, when you were talking about that, of application of, man, God does provide those resources
Yes,
for us.
He does.
When we go to Him, the peace that we need, the wisdom, the joy, the assurance, all those things, they're found in Him, in His
Yeah,
presence.
yeah, absolutely.
There's another concept that you talked about yesterday. It was really fascinating. You said, the verse said, no one put on his ornaments. And you talked about the concept of removal, all the way back from Exodus 3, remove your
Right.
sandals. And could you just maybe talk a little bit more of that? And then do you see a connection there with what Paul talks about in the New Testament, the put off, put on that he talks about?
Yes, there is. I didn't use that yesterday, but that's a great insight into that. When you get up to preach, there's so many things you want to say, but you only have, you only have 50 minutes. So anyway, that's what Kirkwood would say. Yeah. Anyway, yes, if you go back to Exodus 3, you begin right there where you see that God at Mount Horeb, which is where they're back there again, and there at Mount Horeb, God tells Moses, take your sandals off, remove your sandals, because you're on holy ground. You come back here in chapter 33, and he says, none of them they removed their ornaments. In fact, there's another place in here that talks about that, that they removed them. Maybe it's on, I was looking at it yesterday morning. It says they removed them from then on. Basically, from that moment on, they took them off, and they didn't put them, the implication is they didn't put them back on. So you've got that. You've got the chapter with Moses' son where he has to be circumcised. God was coming to kill Moses, and the reason was because he had not circumcised his son, the removal of the flesh from the males. And so you've got this sense of everything is to be removed. Anything that represents this world, anything that represents the flesh, anything that represents that which would cause us to stumble. I think with Moses at the burning bush, remove your sandal. Remove that former life. You've had this former life. Remove it. Your life is going to be changed now.
Yeah.
Here, the same thing with them. The thing that separated them from God were these ornaments that they had taken off, given to Aaron to make into a golden calf. So they removed those. They stripped them on. There it is, right there. So the sons of Israel stripped themselves of their ornaments from Mount Horeb onward. Now the word onward is not in the original text. It's supplied because that is the completion of the thought. So they removed anything that represented what they had done that was related to sin.
Right.
Now the funny thing to me, Barry, is to think that these people were in the desert. Nobody else is around, but they're in the desert. Now this speaks of human vanity. They had been given all of these riches. I mean, really, literally enriched with all of these things from Egypt that the people gave them. Garments and, anything that they had, all of their silver, all of their jewelry, all of that. They took it off and they stripped it off, removed it, and gave it to the Hebrews. Here they were wandering the desert, and they're dressing up every day. And all of these fancy. So it speaks to the heart, the vanity of the heart, the ego of the heart, that I'm always trying to impress somebody else. Wow. So, I mean, in the desert, in the middle of nowhere, dressing up, they're just dressed to kill, and they're just dressed to the nines, and all they're doing is walking around in the desert.
Yeah. No social media.
No, nothing.
No
Nobody.
cameras.
They can take no selfies. They're just out there all dressed up, nowhere to go.
Wow.
But to wander in a circle in the desert. It's really kind of funny. I'd love to have brought that out, but that's why I'm doing it now.
Yeah. Yeah, and so I thought about that in connection to what Paul talks about, put off,
Yes.
Anger, put off the things
Yeah.
of the flesh, immorality, all the things that can be characterized by our former way of life, but then put on the new self.
Yeah, and those words that he uses there are words that you would use to talk about getting dressed and getting undressed, of putting it on and then taking it off. Yeah.
Yeah, so after we come to Christ, there should be a change in
Yes.
our life, and so all of us, that applies certainly.
That
to
was
all
the
of us.
biggest point, I think, that the Anabaptists were trying, the radical reformers were trying to make with the magisterial reformers. That Luther was saying justification by faith, and the Anabaptists were saying yes, but don't stop with that. It must make a change in your life.
That's right.
Luther never really would go there. And I don't know why he wouldn't go there, but the Anabaptists said if there's not a change, if there's not a visible change in your life, it hadn't happened.
Right.
You know.
Right.
So that's why I said these people were not just feeling guilty, but they were under conviction. And I tried to explain the difference between the two of conviction and guilt, is that it made such a deep impression in them that they were willing to, we're taking this stuff off. We're done with this, trying to impress and all.
Yeah. One final thing I thought that was just so insightful. You finished by talking about God told Moses, my presence will go with you,
Yeah.
singular,
Yeah.
and I will give you rest. And talk about Moses' response. And it really, it was a special moment, I think, between you see in the heart of Moses, but also just your heart as a pastor and sharing with the church.
Yeah, the Lord says, of course, Moses is going saying, look, who's going to go with us? And the implication is God, you've got to go with us in all of this. And God said, my presence shall go with you. That's a singular there. He was speaking to Moses. Okay, Moses, I'll go with you, and I'll give you rest. Then he said to him, if your presence does not go with us, that's plural. Moses switches it to the plural. Don't lead us up from here. And he uses that twice, us, us. If you don't go with us, don't lead us up from here. God, it's not enough for you to go with me. And as a pastor, that's what you want for your congregation. Yes, I want to go with God. I want to follow God for my own personal life, but my life literally is not my own to do with what I want.
That's right.
God has called me. I belong to God, and He has placed me among a people for me to intercede. God, please take us all up. I want to go up with my congregation. I want to go forward with my congregation. That's an interesting thing. I've not talked about this in a long time, and I think I've said this maybe a number of years ago. Spurgeon believed that congregations would stand before Jesus Christ together. Now, when Spurgeon was buried, there was and when I say fight, I'm using hyperbole. There was a rush and a fight to see who could be buried the closest to Spurgeon. Dr. Criswell always wanted to be buried next to Dr. Truett. I can see in my head right now, I've stood there at Truett's grave, and there are people on either side, and I don't know who they are. Dr. Criswell is buried in the mausoleum there, but he always wanted to be buried, and I think it had a lot to do. He was such a Spurgeonite, I guess you would say. But Spurgeon believed that congregations would stand together in the day of judgment.
Wow.
And so they would go, or at the great, not at the great white throne, but at the bema, they would stand together. And they would respond how they treated each other as pastor and people before the Lord.
Wow.
So Moses is saying here, I don't want to go without the people that you call me to lead. So I want them to go up with me. And I think that should be every pastor's heart. God, lead me, but don't just lead me. Lead us all. And let your presence go with all of us. Walk us into tomorrow with your presence. That would have been a good sermon for me to have done on the anniversary of the church. Then in a sense, every pastor here, God has led, and God has attempted to lead the congregation to go forward in His presence.
That's right.
So, some people go, some people won't go.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, and it's our responsibility as a church to pray for you and
Yeah.
to follow
Yeah.
how God's leading through you. And and our elders and,
The interesting thing is God doesn't hold Moses responsible for those who will go and those who won't. I sensed the Lord saying that to me early one morning, years ago, back when my folks were living and we were staying there with them, the family and I, that God just said, listen, Moses was given the responsibility to lead. He wasn't responsible for their decisions. So,
yeah, but he was responsible to lead them, to pray for them.
to pray for them.
Yeah.
God, I want us all to go up. Yeah.
Amen.
Which is what I want for Valleydale. I want us to constantly be in the presence of God moving forward.
Amen. Well, it was a special day, and we hope you have a great week. Pray for our San Diego mission team. They'll be out serving the Lord and sharing the gospel this week. And I was encouraged to hear they'll be serving one of the police departments out there.
Oh, great.
And so
Good.
we're excited about that.
California cops will get a little loving from some people from Alabama. How about that?
That's right. Kirkwood, we miss you, brother. We look forward to seeing you soon.
Won't you come home, Kirkwood? Won't you come home? We cried the whole night long. See ya.